So, the two worst types in Pokémon have got to be Bug and Ice, right? Fans of these games have debated the type chart endlessly, but outside of a few very specific contexts across the series, the bottom tier of usability generally consists of these two types in one order or the other. It's hard to deny the statement that Pokemon's type chart is unbalanced, because it just is. Some types are amazing, borderline meta-defining just by their existence, while others, like Bug and Ice, are so flawed that their best Pokemon tend to be strong and popular in spite of that type, and would usually be even better with a different one. It's easy to view all of this as a problem that needs fixing, but in our eyes, this exact imbalance is actually healthy in moderation and makes the series more interesting. Let's talk about why. Hello there, and welcome to the woods. It may surprise you after that opener, but Bug and Ice are probably our two favorite types in Pokemon, and it's not just because we're already a big real-life fan of insects in the season of winter. Both of them are just really interesting and fun to us, partially in spite of their balancing issues, and partially because of them. To get a baseline first, let's highlight what the actual problems are with these two. Bug's biggest issue is that it offers extremely little offensive value to your team, with its spread of 3 super effective hits and 7 not very effective being the worst of any type in the game, tied with Grass, which holds stronger and more unique benefits in the positive type interactions it does have. Bug is functionally outclassed by basically every alternative type it has offensive or defensive overlap with, between its terrible offensive profile with way too many powerful types resisting it, and its average at best defensive profile with some powerful types super effective against it. Its best asset on the type chart is resisting both fighting and ground, two of the most threatening offensive types. But flying has an even better matchup against both those types, and Bug and flying are both equally weak to the rock coverage that both those types usually get anyways. Ice's problems are easier to recognize, but a more complicated issue in practice. It's obviously designed to be a glass cannon among the types, with excellent offensive presence but the worst defensive profile of any type in the game. Unlike Bug, which is sometimes a defensively valuable addition, pairing Ice with any other type will always be a straight-up downgrade to that other type's defensive ability. Especially because how many resistances you have tends to be slightly more important than what your weaknesses are. This lack of defense causes issues for two main reasons. Number one, having Ice-type attacks is often more valuable than actually being an Ice-type, which can feel a little insulting when most water types get Ice coverage basically for free. Number two, it means Ice types tend to be sort of shoehorned into a particular role. In most Pokemon games, only the fast, offensively focused Ice types have really seen much success. This can be a bit of a shame since it feels like a limiting of your options. Now, all that said, Ice does have more advantages going for it than Bug does, especially in modern generations with things like the Hail to Snow rework and Aurora Veil. It's a more polarized type, no pun intended, with higher highs and lower lows. So, while these two types aren't the worst in the game by a landslide, hopefully you get a sense for why they would be considered the bottom two. Honestly, Rock isn't that much better, but we've spent enough time on preamble. Here's the question at hand. How could a type being bad be a good thing? It comes down to a few factors in our eyes. Part of it is the sense of flavor it provides. Let's look at Ice. The identity of the type is based on a few things combined, actually. It's not just the literal physical substance of frozen water, but also the element of cold itself, and also an association with snowy or polar environments. Tying these three factors together into one, it feels totally natural that it would be something of a glass cannon. Winter is harsh, biting, oppressive. It might suck to overheat in summer, but at least plants and many animals are full of life, whereas the cold only seems to drain life. But if you look at Ice as the physical substance, it's well associated with being fragile. Snowflakes are beautiful, but they never last. Icicles can stab you, but they'll shatter in the process. Really, even the chill of winter is easier to defeat than the heat of summer when you think about it. In our eyes, Ice as an element should be a glass cannon, and anything different would feel kind of weird. Even Bug's general shittiness feels thematically relevant. They're bugs. Real insects are strong for their size and have plenty of fans, and for good reason, but if you turn the concept of bug into an element, it shouldn't feel gifted with a dominating power. The type in Pokémon is very informed by the Japanese cultural phenomenon of young boys being fans of bug collecting, as well as the cultural associations of insects with heroism, but both of those actually feel perfect for the underdog role. A fascination with bugs and bug catching is something you'd be expected to grow out of once it's time to focus on important big boy things. An interesting hero usually isn't stronger than their villains, instead they win through being smarter or more resourceful, overcoming the odds that were stacked against them. Bugs are underdogs. The gameplay identity of these two types feels basically perfect for their flavor, and I actually want to use the buffs they've each received in more recent generations as an example. Ice has gained precisely 0 new resistances, but what it has gained are a bunch of thoughtfully designed Pokémon with unique gameplay identities, a status move that would be fucking broken if it was associated with any weather condition besides the ice one, and then a complete rework to that same weather condition that makes it much more impactful and easier to work into your team composition, alongside more ways to set it up than ever. Ice types actually have a defensive niche now, but it's one they can only access through unique and interesting tools that work differently from more straightforward defensive strategies, and that's perfect. Bug is resisted by more types than ever, but it keeps getting new tools and new buffs to old ones that complement a more strategic and resourceful playstyle. So many of its assets, including the 80 power leech life, the proliferation of moves like lunge that always lower a stat, and scary stuff like quiver dance and tinted lens, would be much stronger if they were associated with better types and distributed more widely. But Game Freak knows Bug isn't a strong type on its own, and that's why they give it these tools as freely as they do. In line with that, we actually like the idea of nerfing U-turn not by changing anything about the move itself, but by just reducing its distribution so that most of the Pokémon who learn it are bug types, instead of it being handed out to practically everything that has either wings or the ability to run fast. On another subject, it's worth emphasizing that variety is always healthy for game feel, but especially when it comes to something like Pokemon's type chart. There are so many types on there, guys, an overwhelming amount for newer players who didn't grow up with the series. It's important for those new players that most of the type matchups are pretty intuitive through basic real-world logic, but for new and experienced players alike, the entire type mechanic would be a bland, sludgy, incoherently designed mess if every type had perfectly balanced strengths with each other. Pokemon's ridiculously large and complex type system only manages to justify its size and complexity because it is so asymmetrical that every type feels like itself. If different types didn't lend themselves to different stereotypes, if every type felt equally natural filling in any archetype, if defensive ice types were just as easy to make as defensive steel types, if being a bug was equally valuable to being a dragon, the game would be straight up worse. We're 100% confident about this much at least. Of course, there are certain caveats to an asymmetrical, unbalanced type chart. Namely, it works best when you design your individual monsters while keeping their types' strengths and weaknesses in mind. And when we say that, we're not saying never make defensive ice types. What we're saying is, please make defensive ice types, but strategically buff them in ways that are still balanced because they have a bad defensive type. Let Bug keep being a weak type, but give your individual Bug types absolutely cracked abilities and move pools that are kept in check because Bug has such weak offensive matchups. Let Rock-type attacks keep being flawed and unreliable, but design your Rock-type Pokémon with that in mind by making them badass in ways that might be excessive if they all had a Rock-type clone of Close Combat or whatever you're thinking of. You see what we mean? There are more ways to be equal than being equal, and we think that's a really cool aspect of Pokemon's balancing. Sure, Game Freak is still pretty hit or miss about this, they're still making some weak and disappointing Pokemon of all these types to this day, but what we're really saying here is that we want to see them continue leaning into this form of unbalanced balance as we move forward from here, rather than rethinking the actual identity of any of the underperforming types. For one more note to close us off, are there any actual changes we'd be willing to make to the type chart if we had the power? That's a hard question, and honestly, we'd probably give you two completely different answers on 2 different days. You can probably guess based on the rest of the video, but we think any changes should stay pretty low-key if they did happen. For instance, we really disagree with adding or removing any weaknesses from any type, since those would be much more extreme and jarring changes to the game feel in our eyes. There are 3 possible type chart changes that we're usually on board for, and in roughly descending order of how justified they feel, we've got Fairy losing its resistance to Bug, Ice gaining a resistance to Water, and Rock gaining a resistance to itself. When we're really feeling bold, we're also willing to consider Ice gaining a resistance to Flying as well, and Ghost also losing its resistance to Bug. But at that point, we're getting into some fairly extreme changes, so let's just keep it to the first 3 here. All of them feel minor enough to not jeopardize the overall vibes and flavor of each relevant type, while being just enough of a boost that it would make certain Pokémon a little bit easier to slot onto your team. Well, that goes for the first 2 at least. The Rock one isn't that much of a buff, we just like the idea because it feels like it makes sense logically for it to resist itself. Anyways, we wouldn't turn down these 3 changes if they ever did happen, but we don't think they're necessary either. Every type in Pokémon already feels like it's doing exactly what that type should be doing, at least when it comes to the type chart, if not the individual Pokémon. Like, yeah, they missed when balancing Hisui and Avalugg, but the way to make that cute little thing worth using in battle never had to involve changing anything about its types, you know? All they really had to do was either give it more speed than those measly 10 extra points so that it could run Choice Scarf, or give it good priority moves, or give it some busted signature move, or some combination of stuff along those lines. But, how to fix bad Pokémon would be a topic for an entirely different video. One that we'll hopefully try our hand at someday, so hey, feel free to subscribe and stuff if you enjoyed this video and want to see us make more things like it. The absolutely shocking reception to our previous video has been wonderful to see, and it's made us all the more excited to keep going with this channel. Thank you all so much for watching and commenting. We hope to see you again soon.